Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. And as I always do, I want to extend a very special welcome to anybody in Taiwan itself who may be tuning in for what is the latest in a series of events and publications and programs that we've done at Carnegie, with a big focus on Taiwan's economic competitiveness in the first instance, but then opportunities for US-Taiwan economic coordination and collaboration in the second, with a particular focus on opportunities in technology. If you haven't followed that program, it's exciting and interesting, and if I may say so, a little less security-centric than most think tank programs. We've tended to focus more on political economy and technology and innovation. You can take a look at the Carnegie website and see some of that work in our Taiwan program. It includes reports, events, videos, projects, and so on. For today, let me start by saying that the inauguration of new administrations in Taiwan and come January in the United States offers an opportunity that we have periodically to reassess strategic and economic priorities. And to their credit, the last few administrations on both sides have viewed broadened partnership as an element of both power and purpose. But as I was just saying to my co-panelists in a little setup conversation we had before we went live, it's been my view that despite new dialogue forums and a few new and important initiatives, the economic and technology component of the US-Taiwan relationship has in some important ways failed to match its promise. Now, one reason for that, if we're being blunt about it, is that Taiwan's goals have sometimes, I think, been mismatched with US trade policy priorities. For a long time, if I could put it bluntly, Taiwan's principal economic objective and most urgent priority in its relations with the United States was to secure a bilateral trade agreement, or BTA. But for a couple of administrations, that ran squarely into the American trade team's preoccupations with negotiations with other major economies, but also frustration over market access and other barriers in Taiwan. And so a reluctance to divert focus. But that doesn't mean there isn't a lot that's happening that's exciting. And now here we are again with President Lai Ching-te in office and a new US president, either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, taking office in 5 months. And so what we thought we would do is use this panel to take stock, but also to try to be a little bit creative, especially on the technology front, where discussion of semiconductors and chips tends to suck the oxygen out of everything else, not least on possibilities in software, not just in hardware, but also on hardware-software integration. And also, it also tends to suck the oxygen out of new and emerging sectors like, say, AI or the life sciences, not just microelectronics. I want to talk, I hope, team, about more contact among entrepreneurs, startups, capital, especially because it's been my view that Taiwan's startup sector is insufficiently international and has struggled to be more global. In fact, we did a Carnegie report on that a few years ago, and through cross-investment in both directions, which we could stand to bolster. So for this, we have an amazing panel who I welcome. Tianzhe Chen was Minister of National Economic Development in a couple of administrations. Jason Xu is a tech expert, business person, and former legislator. And Aaron Murphy is deeply experienced with trade and investment issues, both in and out of government, and is now a senior fellow at our neighboring think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So team, welcome. Appreciate you joining us. And if I could, maybe let's start with a stock taking and just kind of go around the horn and discuss where you think we are, first on trade, second on investment, and then third, in particular, on some of the technology initiatives. We'll get into sectors, we can get into what's wanting, but first, talk a little bit about the successes and just give us a status check in light of what's happening in Taiwan's economy. And also here in Tianzhe, since you're sitting in Taipei, maybe I'll start with you. What's your sense of how we're doing on the bilateral front?
Yeah, well, I think the this year in particular, we have seen dramatic change in trade statistics between Taiwan and the United States. Since World War II, Taiwan's economic development is essentially depend on trade and dependent on trade with the United States. So the Taiwanese company really serve as the contract manufacturer for U.S. company since the very beginning until today, including TSMC. So in the high time, I believe in 1986, you have seen that Taiwan's export, I think it's 48% of that was going to the United States. And of course, the rise of China really, changed that trade picture dramatically. Instead of direct trading with the United States, Taiwan has to trade with the U.S. indirectly via China. So China become a kind of, a triangular trade route for Taiwanese companies to continue to serve the U.S. market. So, for example, that Taiwan continue to be the biggest producer of computers, but more than 90% of these computers were actually made in China. So the trade figure will show that Taiwan's trade statistics will show that China was the biggest trade partner of Taiwan, and the U.S. percentage was really falling from the peak of 48%, I think, down to the kind of bottom point. I believe it was about 10%, 48% to 10%. But now the figure this year, the figure I just look at the figure for July. For this year, up to July, Taiwan's export 24% was going to the United States. We are talking about direct trade, because the trade statistic only account for the goods which are shipped from Taiwan to the U.S. So that percentage was now up to 24%. This was, I believe, the highest point in more than 20 years. It was the highest point in 20 years, I believe. And of course, on the other hand, you also see the Taiwan's trade with China, including Hong Kong, now was down to 30.9%. The highest point was about 43%. So you're looking at a 13 percentage point decrease in about the last 2 years. So this was dramatic change in the trade picture, and of course the forces that brought about this change is the geopolitical situation, the U.S.-China contention. The U.S. companies has a very clear policy to pull the production out of China as much as they could. And when they try to do that, they usually have asked the Taiwanese contract manufacturer to do that. So therefore, the computers now is no longer 90% made in China. The percentage now is down to about 50% now. And, and then some of them, of course, are relocated to Southeast Asia. And a very important part of the computer, the cloud server in particular, the ones which with the AI functions, the most advanced and most valuable computers are now actually made in Taiwan. So therefore, the trade statistics will show that our direct export to U.S. Was rising by about 13 percentage point in the last 2 years. So this dramatic change is not really, if you could, you can say that was due to a major change of the U.S. trade policy. But it apparently has nothing to do with any particular agreement or arrangement that the officials of Taiwan on the U.S. side have been trying to construct. In the last 2 decades, I believe since the Chen Shui-bian administration in 2000, we are hearing the government, Taiwanese government, pushing for FTA, free trade agreement with the United States, and that never been realized. And I think that will never be possible now, given the political condition in the United States. But nevertheless, the trade relations, particularly direct trade, trade without the involvement of China, now is coming to the highest point in since 1990, I believe. So this is very important and dramatic change for Taiwan. So I think there must be possibilities for the two sides to find different ways of collaboration in order to enhance the value of this trade, looking into this future. So I think today's forum is very, very timely and useful for us to really think about what we should do in order to, take advantage of the changing condition, which are already happening, and creating more value for both sides. Instead of still, digging into this, possible traditional way of trade arrangement, preferential trade arrangement. So I think this is the time that we can discuss this issue.
Yeah, thanks. So, Aaron, that's actually a good segue to you. Can you flip to an American perspective and first contextualize it for the audience a little bit? Talk about why hasn't a BTA happened? I mean, every time I'm up on Capitol Hill, I testified to Congress, I don't know, like a year ago, and it wasn't even a hearing about Taiwan. It was a hearing about the Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership, the framework, the IPEF. And I mean, every member of Congress on both sides kept talking about Taiwan and why don't we have an FTA with Taiwan. I saw Ambassador Nikki Haley was visiting Taiwan the other day. She was talking about an FTA again. So if there's all this bipartisan support, first, just contextualize this. Why hasn't it happened? And then second, to build on Tiandra's point, the fact that it hasn't happened has not been inimical, obviously, to expansion of trade and investment between the two sides. But it seems to me that there are still obstacles to certain kinds of capital flow into Taiwan. So maybe contextualize that a little bit from the American side, but also, again, talk a little bit about where you think we are and are not.
Sure. And thanks, Evan, for having a rival think tanker here. And I'm really happy to talk about Taiwan in economics terms. So if I could just say at the top, I think part of the issue here, and I think what we're getting at here is, and flipping this and talking about in trade and economic terms, is that Taiwan is always put in military context. And that we're always talking about building up resiliency and trying to prevent conflict in the Taiwan Strait through a military lens. But it's just as important to talk about it in an economic lens and to build that resiliency. I mean, you see all these reports about what could happen to the global economy, and it's as much as building that economic resiliency to prevent conflict as it is. And it's in our best interest as well. So you hear this. You hear a lot of talk, and that's really what Washington is really good at, talking a lot about this stuff. Action is a totally different thing. I think the simplest answer as to why we haven't seen action on any sort of FTA or anything with Taiwan or any movement on anything even touching trade, even in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework or IPEF, is politics. Trade has become a real third rail for both Republicans and Democrats. It's a real election issue. And if you've been living in a cave for the last couple of months, we have an election here in the United States. And this has been a key issue for both. It's about preserving and building a foundation for more American jobs, bringing manufacturing back here, providing good paying American jobs, whatever those are, but it seems to be centered around manufacturing, whether that's in semiconductor fab facilities, whether that's in electronics, whether that's in, the auto industry and whatnot. And if you look at who else is in those industries, Taiwan is one of those. And part of that is because we made a decision decades ago that, semiconductors will probably not be manufactured here. And we're somewhat paying that price. That's what economics is. That's what decisions governments make. So when we talk about trade, this has been a predominant issue in, really started kind of coming to the public discourse in 2016 with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton on the Democrat side. And of course, Donald Trump, talking about bringing jobs back to America, rebuilding the manufacturing side. And it's really poisoned the well in talking about trade, because what that means is that there's going to be real winners and real losers on both sides. It's not just America. There's going to be losers on the other side of the trade agreement. And it's up to the government to figure out what to do with those losers on that. And sometimes government, and often most cases, governments don't always come up with good ideas as to what to do with those losers. So, everyone looks back to what happened in the 90s with the manufacturing losses going overseas. And that's still very much a talking point. So with IPAF, you saw kind of the demolition of Pillar 1, which was really focused on fair trade last year, right before APEC. And that was done mostly because of politics. Sherrod Brown, who has a pretty difficult Senate race right now, came out virulently against Pillar 1. He was also against USMCA and is generally against trade agreements. And that's because his district was harmed and his state was harmed by trade and loss of manufacturing jobs. Elizabeth Warren was also against the fair trade pillar because of issues around digital trade, which I hope we talk about later, because I think that's an important area for Taiwan and the United States to work on. So a lot of it is around politics. And neither side is really talking to each other. And even though I think that there are pieces within the Democrat and Republican Party that do agree that trade is important, that it helps build relationships, that it is part of, how economics works and how the world works, how it promotes development and helps boost, winners on either side. It's a question about what to do with the losers. And it's really difficult in this sort of political and election environment to do that. And so I think that we're going to have a real difficulty getting to that. Now, if Harris wins, I think we're going to see the continuation of IPEF. What happens to the first pillar, who knows? But, as it comes to an FTA, there's a lot of talk. We have the 21st century Taiwan agreement, but it's trade in name only without any, I think, real substance.
Right. So, Jason, I'm going to come to you in a second because I want to start to dig in on tech. But can I just go back to Tianzhe for a second? I want to ask you a really blunt question. Since Aaron mentioned geopolitics and U.S.-China strategic competition, and you alluded to that in your remarks as well, can I just ask a very blunt question about the geopolitics? Where is the Taiwan business community positioned on the fact that the U.S. keeps talking about geopolitical conflict and the possibility of large-scale disruption? Because obviously that scale, scope, and intensity of disruption would affect perceptions of Taiwan's investment climate and the extent to whether investment in Taiwan is a positive long-term investment proposition that's likely to produce yield. And I ask that because I will say, we can't wish away the geopolitics, but when I talk to people in Taiwan's business community, sometimes what I hear is they wish the United States, to be blunt about it, would just shut up, because they say, why are you talking down our investment climate? Why are you talking about all this conflict and risk, conflict, geopolitical disruption? Nobody's going to want to invest here. And that distracts attention from the merits of the investment case for parking capital and money in Taiwan as a long-term proposition. Is the business community positioned in a different place, let's say, from geopolitical types on how to talk about risk factors in Taiwan?
I guess the Taiwanese business community, government, or the people, of course, really do not like the sort of the people in the West talking about Taiwan being the most dangerous place in the world, uh, and, and sort of implying the investment risk there is really high, and then for discourage new investment into Taiwan. That's true. But on the other hand, I believe the community, including the business community, are taking this geopolitical confrontation seriously, and they knew this was something going to continue, and the risk of China invasion was never been taken lightly in Taiwan. Although that we do not believe this is something imminent, it's going to happen. But we need to consider that as a possibility. I think most people I know in the business community will never deny that. So therefore, there's certainly a certain sort of risk diversification plan need to be done, and you can really the TSMC's action responses to U.S., Germany, and Japan can testify this. The business community are taking this seriously, and they agree that putting out some of the production capacity outside of Taiwan is good for international community. But on the other hand, Taiwan will remain the core investment site for all companies, which has been headquartered in Taiwan. We cannot sort of have a plan of diversification. It doesn't mean you're going to make Taiwan a secondary manufacturing base. So that's the kind of idea. Because the reason we have a kind of relatively competitive semiconductor sector, it has to be attributed to some sort of indigenous national conditions, which you cannot find anywhere else in the world, right? That's what the trade theory, economic theory will tell us, right? So therefore, we're going to build that competitive strength on that basis and continue to strengthen it. And in the meantime, you also diversify that in order to, there's not only good for our partners who need to diversify to feel, more comfortable when some contingency things happen, but it's also good for business itself to be, on a sustainable basis, to be a sustainable partner for these major multinational companies. So these are the we know the risk, but this is not going to discourage or slow down the investment in Taiwan, particularly from the viewpoint of the local investment. And so we are hoping that because of that, the multinational firms will also take the same position. Taiwan is still an important place to do manufacturing because there's something that we can do best here. But in the meantime, we will cooperate, with our partners if they are concerned about this, and therefore that, because as a contract manufacturer, you're really partners, right? You're partners to your clients, so you make decisions jointly. So if there's a risk, this is a risk to be shared by all partners. So that's kind of strategy that we are hoping is going to work, to benefit and also acceptable. And of course, that will put us in a more difficult position. The so-called the Taiwan plus one policy, for example. Some multinational clients are demanding Taiwanese contract manufacturer to have a production site out of Taiwan. But that doesn't mean they cannot produce in Taiwan.
Right.
They just demand that you should have a sort of backup or secondary production site outside Taiwan. So this kind of strategy could be worked out it could be worked out and be acceptable for both.
Yeah, I mean, I ask because it gets at something foundational and a possible disjuncture that Aaron essentially did, which is that, in the real world, investing in people, plants, and assets in a country is a vote of confidence in that country's economy.
Yeah.
And so I listened to you talk, and we listened to people in the Taiwan government and the Taiwan business community talking about what they want is that vote of confidence in Taiwan's economy. Invest here in Taiwan in people, plants, and assets. But if you listen to what Aaron said, we have two political parties in the United States that are talking about investing in people, plants, and assets here. And so there is this question of whether that creates a disjuncture and how we navigate that in the interests of encouraging not just more capital flow, but people flow in both directions. And Jason, that actually gets at tech, because since TSMC has been invoked, 4, 5, 6 times already, if I think about the history of, microelectronics in Taiwan going back to the 80s, it depended so heavily on circulation of people and knowledge between both sides of the Pacific. And you had this kind of, there's a scholar, Annalise Saxenian, who calls this brain circulation. There was this brain circulation between Taiwanese and Americans going back and forth. And it helped build these sectors in Taiwan. And so it does beg the question of whether in emerging and foundational industries, some of which you work in, things like AI-enabled applications, or the life sciences, or things that, as Aaron said, depend on concerting digital rules and digital opportunities, we're seeing the same kind of exchange of people, capital, data, knowledge, technology. Do you see that happening beyond the legacy sectors? And also reflect a little bit on whether you see the investments happening on the Taiwan side, for example, in education, not just in mechanical and electrical engineering, which are the fields that serve the legacy industries, but let's say in computer science or in the life sciences or in data science, that is the foundation for, let's say, AI, as an example. Are those pillars happening? And if they're not, what can the US and Taiwan be doing educationally or in the markets to make that set of investments happen?
Well, thanks, Evan. And it's great, both an honor and a pleasure to be joining this panel. Before I go into AI, I love to address some of the points that both Dr. Chen and Aaron mentioned. I think the challenge we see here is Taiwan is now in the transition of being a recipe of a success in the globalization era to now a new model of US-China bifurcation. And this requires a strong collaboration on both sides. Particularly, I think when our firms such as TSMC are now diversifying, they are looking for strong support in policy and as well as developing the cluster effect that was so successful in Taiwan over the last 3 decades. And we've seen TSMC's fab in Arizona was being delayed and stalled over and over, whereas their Japan projects has been extraordinarily successful. So if you compare the 2 projects and you see how governments in different countries approach manufacturing and high-tech manufacturing. And so that gives something for us to think about. If a new administration comes in, whether it's a Kamala administration or a Trump second term, how should both governments approach or improve ways that so that our competitive strength or this type of advantage that is so important for both sides can be maintained and even continuously be on the leading edge. And most of the challenges that Taiwan firms face is we used to be in a position where we can take advantage of China's manufacturing capacity and relatively cheap labor, and as well as the market entry, and also just the fact that we share same culture and an easier working collaboration. And now that there's been a growing trend of de-risking, decoupling, and bifurcation, most of the Taiwan high-tech manufacturing firms are prepared to leave China or somewhat de-attached from China. Some of the firms, including Pegatron, which is the second largest iPhone maker, even sold off their assets to their partners in China at a loss or at cost. And for something like this, relocation supply chain would be a long and painful process. It would be a big learning curve from both the Taiwan and US side. I spoke to both Taiwan high-tech manufacturers and their US customers, brands such as Dell or HP that are still manufactured in China. They keep the low-end products in China and slowly move the high-end products out of China. But it's not so easy because we are talking about a supply chain that's built over the last 3 decades, and you can't just move every screw or pillar or even have every single thing move out of China overnight. And we're not even talking about in a month time, but we're talking about over the last 4 or 5 years, starting from the end of Trump term and continues to today's Biden administration. So if this trend were to continue, which I believe will continue, how does the firm in Taiwan deal with, first of all, the management issue, and secondly, how to restructure their assets allocation or manufacturing capability, capacity, and as well as the where do they choose to domicile? And if the notion of investing in Taiwan is risky, and even the talk of it as something of a Taiwan contingency in 2027 by U.S. military establishment continue to persist, I think we will see a growing trend of out of China, out of Taiwan, meaning that we'll still work with Taiwan, we'll still place order from Taiwan, but you can't produce from Taiwan or from China. So that becomes an issue to most of our firms, including big computer or mobile headsets manufacturers now trying to relocate to Southeast Asia. So these type of things are huge issues to deal with. And then I would also wanted to highlight the areas that I think it's inherent part of the what we are dealing with right now in terms of national security and also the technology opportunities and challenges, which is AI. Obviously, semiconductor is the backbone of AI development right now, and TSMC being singularly the company that can produce the type of advanced chips that would power the AI chips or to train the compute that is needed for large language model. So this gives us the opportunity both for cooperation and also harmonization in terms of AI development and AI regulation and policy harmonization. So first of all, if we realize that AI is going to be the most important trend going forward, there are a few things that Taiwan and US can collaborate, and we need to move fast. One is the smart manufacturing and industrial 4.0. The high-tech manufacturing is the key competence of Taiwan. If you look at our stock market, it's basically 70 to 75% high-tech manufacturing, and they are all export driven. And so how would the US incorporate or a comprehensive agreement and add specific items that would protect Taiwan's trade as well as high-tech manufacturing capability as Taiwan prepare to work with the US to de-risk from China? And these type of things are critically important because everything that's now both hardware and software integrated, and it's a hybrid integrations right now. Secondly, is AI in software and biotech. If you look at Taiwan's strength, one of the strong suits for Taiwan is our healthcare data. We sit on a wealth of 25 years of a universal healthcare program with just huge amount of data that is basically unaccessible and unreachable anywhere else in the world. So US and Taiwan can explore collaborations in AI-driven healthcare technologies. So what if Taiwan set up a AI healthcare biotech hubs or position itself as such, and then attract major US health tech firms or biotech firms to base their data centers in Taiwan to use or harness the desensitized data, health data from Taiwan to train the most advanced drug development models. And that is very, very groundbreaking and in medical diagnosis and drug discovery and personalized medicine. And that's a Taiwan's strong advantage in the healthcare system data capabilities that can complement US's innovation. And secondly, I want to highlight the talent and research collaboration. The race in AI is not just in the compute and the amount of dollars you throw in to buy the GPU chips and build data centers. It's really a race to talent. If you look at today's US and China's AI competition, you realize that China's capability to produce high quality paper on AI development and also most advanced AI research citation coming out of US, half of those citations contain Chinese authors, meaning that part of those research stem from either a Chinese scientist or Chinese graduate researchers that are based in the US. One day they can return to China, and this becomes an issue to the US. So I call for more deeper collaboration between Taiwan and US in AI and talent research collaboration. So expanding the academic industry partnerships between the two nations can foster AI talent and research. Universities, startups, technology companies in both countries could exchange AI knowledge, data, and resource for AI innovation. Now, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, made a huge splash when he came to Taiwan and sort of put Taiwan on the world map again. But we all need to put our money where our mouth is. Really, put a roadmap or dollars into building this research center and attract the world talent and make sure that U.S. is part of it and U.S. supports this, and we incorporate the skilled workers from overseas to this place, to Taiwan, and to enhance the AI research and collaboration. And lastly, I will talk a little bit about the challenges in regulation in AI, so both in the export control as well. There's a regulatory divergence in terms of how U.S. and Taiwan approach AI regulatory framework. And this touches on the areas such as data privacy, cybersecurity, and IP. So harmonizing those regulations can be complex, but necessary for effective collaborations. So I feel that those were type of things that U.S. must or Taiwan must work those items into the trade agreement or the whatever that's been in discussion right now, the 21st century trade advocacy. And secondly is export control restrictions. Now I work very extensively with the semiconductor companies and who echo their concern to me that when the export control is released, they were only asked or notified on the day of the policy delivered, and that becomes an issue when they want to comply, but then they have trouble reallocating their supply chain resources and or reorganize their supply chain. So if the U.S. could incorporate the Taiwan semiconductor or high-tech manufacturing sector's opinion or consultation before issuing those export controls policies, I think it would be helpful, and it would be a strong indicator of how U.S. willingly want to work with its allies, including Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. All three countries have a very deep business interest both in the U.S. and China, also national security concerns. And lastly, I would just say,
to be clear, you're talking about U.S. export controls.
U.S. controls, yeah.
And lack of coordination with
Lack of coordination, yeah.
As opposed to Korea,
issue.
for example.
Yeah. And I'll just end in this one quick point on the data technology transfer and IP protection as well as data privacy. Now, this hinges on Taiwan's being the forefront of cyber attacks by China. We are hit on on average 30 million times on a daily basis. China takes massive scan on our healthcare portal and a government portal and industrial portal. And so how would the U.S. help support Taiwan to ensure that IP protection is protected and the technology transfer and as well as data privacy are secured? And there needs to be a third place data backup, much akin to what Estonia suffered when they were attacked by Russia. They now store their classified and critical data in a third neutral place, such in Luxembourg. And so Taiwan and the US must work out a data sanctuary or AI data protection haven that would ensure these critical data that's so importantly not to be attacked or compromised by China. And at the end of the day, we can also say we can back up in the cloud. But cloud should not be the only resort. We must have a very strong fortress for our data. And so that's the both areas in tech and AI and the challenges in regulations and policies and opportunities.
Yeah. Hey, Aaron, do you want to pull this thread on knowledge-intensive industries a little bit? I mean, it seems to me we've already teased the reasons why that's the growth area, right? I mean, first, there's manufacturing-related risk. Second, Taiwan has advantages, not in scale, right? China's got 1 billion people. Taiwan's got 25 million or so. So scale, not an advantage, but high quality data and the ability to leverage trust, because China may have scale, but it doesn't necessarily have trust. Trust in data, trust as a trusted vendor, trusted hub, trusted conduit. So second, Taiwan could leverage trust. And then third, these are higher yielding industries in terms of education and so on. And it can globalize Taiwan, which after all is a place that doesn't have a lot of platform companies in the way that other big economies do. So pull the thread beyond AI, just talk about, like, if you could launch 3 initiatives to build knowledge intensive collaboration, what would they be and what's missing? Is it circulation of people? Is it something that is regulatory on the Taiwan side that's standing in the way of early stage investments? Or is it something more structural in the way that we talk to each other, either at the firm level, the capital market level, or the government level?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really one of Taiwan's greatest strengths, and one that can hardly be replicated. It's a strong democracy. It has a well-educated population, and most of its economy, I'd say 80 to 90% of it, is small, medium-sized enterprises, but not in the way that we think of SMEs here, which is like, and no slight to SMEs, but like artisanal soaps and candy shops and whatnot. This is like machine parts, knowledge-based industries, AI, biomedical stuff. Like, these are small, medium-sized enterprises because they were able to leverage skilled engineers with high output, but a small footprint. So what can Taiwan do to leverage this? Now, the people part is a challenge. When we're looking at the future of work, I was in a meeting right before this. I was asked, what keeps you up at night? And one of the questions was the future of work. And that we talk about building these industries with high paying jobs, good paying jobs. But are we going to have the people for it? Are we going to have the people that want to have those jobs? And Taiwan and China are already running into issues in populating people in semiconductor fabs. I mean, semiconductors are what's going to power all of our technology, including emerging technology. But trying to convince a young person to spend their life in a fab that's windowless, that you can't bring in your phone and you have to wear what equates to like a beekeeper outfit, is not really that attractive to people, no matter how much it pays. So that's one thing. So we have to think about the quality and the types of jobs that we're trying to do here. One thing I think that Taiwan can do is really doing people-to-people exchanges and leveraging the lack of people, but leveraging its skills-based enterprises. And that's bringing in folks to either do work-based programs and capacity building in their own industries, in their own companies, bringing them into their science parks, or doing exchanges overseas by having Taiwan officials, business leaders, having them send their workforce out to help train, work in industries. So you start setting up those connections, and that includes in industries as well. Taiwan should work, the government should work in having programs and universities overseas, particularly through its southbound policy. I think one of the best programs that Taiwan has done is to really diversify in somewhat of an apolitical way, especially given this pressure on Southeast Asia to make a choice between China and Taiwan. This is a way for Taiwan to offer itself as a business choice, as it's purely an economic choice. And it also allows Taiwan to be able to diversify its economic portfolio, its investment portfolio, and its choice of partner portfolio. You don't have to recognize us in the UN, but you are engaged with us on trade, on investment, and our FDI flows. But to work with these universities that you're going to either set up a manufacturing plant or eventually have those folks come and work with you. Taiwan has extensive relationships with Singapore, with Vietnam, with Thailand, and probably, I'm guessing in the future, Malaysia and Indonesia, that are also seen as part of the supply chain on semiconductors, but other types of electronics manufacturing, but also textile and apparel manufacturing as well. So I think the people to people, the workforce capacity, and also working on just, the types of policies that will allow for these types of entrepreneurships. I don't think it's so much, the regulations and legislations. I think that Taiwan has made efforts to try to reduce trade barriers and tariffs. We saw that a bit in the 21st century. U.S.-Taiwan trade, mixing up the order of that trade agreement. Again, trade only in name. But, as the world is starting to move back towards talking about tariffs, I think that Asia, particularly Southeast Asia and Taiwan, are starting to move back from that, which is a good thing. And that's part and parcel of what CPTPP would be doing as well. But that Taiwan should also kind of double down more on that relationship with Southeast Asia, as well as the United States, in trying to build that workforce capacity, those people-to-people engagements, but also investing overseas, because I think that's going to pay dividends both for their economic security, but eventually in trying to tamp down conflict in their region. Because it's just as much, and I hate bringing this back to the military side of things, but you talk about what it means for the U.S. and China and Taiwan, what it means in terms of a conflict. But when you start talking to other trade partners and economic partners of Taiwan, it matters to them as well. I mean, it's not just, we'll decouple from Taiwan. It's like, no, Taiwan brings a lot of value to the economy, to countries. It's not that you can just forget about them. They're a strong democracy. They have a skilled workforce. It's a wonderful place to go. Wonderful food. They could definitely do a lot in terms of food diplomacy, and I think we'd all be better for it. But it's, this is something that I think that they have a strength in terms of economic engagement, and they should utilize it, both by really marketing themselves overseas, traveling to capitals, both in Southeast Asia, the United States, but also extend that relationship to Europe as well.
Hey, Tindra, you were Minister of National Development. So do you feel like all of these ambitious, knowledge-intensive plans and programs that have been set in place in Taiwan, I'm thinking of things like there's this so-called 5+2 Innovative Industries Plan that President Tsai had. Do you feel like those are sufficiently internationalized, not just in terms of aspiration, but in terms of the substantive pillars of attracting capital, expertise, and ultimately investment?
The 5+2 policy is actually not a globalization program. It's actually
Right.
try to mobilize domestic demand for new industry, which is not a traditional Taiwanese industrial policy. And the reason for President Tsai to sort of adopt this policy is really a reflection that Taiwan is facing tremendous difficulty of expanding its export before this geopolitical condition has changed. And so I think that, commenting on Erin's comments, this southbound policy is so important for us, and also I think the China administration and both the new administration of President Lai is trying to use that, but this policy has not been working until this point. And I think the basic problem is the U.S. is not engaged. U.S. did not have a coherent policy towards Southeast Asia since TPP has been rejected. So you're talking about restructuring supply chain, but there's not any policy really try to promote that restructuring. The policy we have seen at this point is nothing but protectionism. You really need a policy to get the partners in Southeast Asian countries to be connected. And in order to do that, you need a policy. If not TPP, we need something else. Now, what's going on right now is until this point, is when Taiwanese companies are asked to pull out of China, if they cannot come back to Taiwan to produce, some of these things could never been produced in Taiwan anymore because of the cost. They have to go to Southeast Asia, right? If they go to Southeast Asia, they have to buy parts and components from China in order to make these things productive and competitive. Because anything comes from China is tax-free, it's tariff-free, it's free of duties. But we don't have any FTA with Southeast Asian countries except Singapore. So if you buy anything from Taiwan, you pay tariff. You ship this from China, it's tariff-free. So even when these company relocate their production to Southeast Asia, they continue to depend on China for the supply of these component materials. So this is not a real sort of decoupling or restructuring policy. So there's a basic, very important policy, a regional policy you like. You have a regional policy to get the Southeast Asian countries involved in this process. It's very important until this point. Alex has been asking a question whether Taiwan should think about any CPTPP, join that. We will never be able to join unless U.S. is engaged in this program. So if the U.S. has decided to abandon CPTPP, Taiwan will have no chance of joining this because of China. You know, you don't expect these small countries in Southeast Asia to stand up to Chinese sort of, pressure without the U.S. help. That will never happen. Given that for China is already now applying to join CPTPP, right? So that a very sort of obvious, apparent sort of strategic play on the China side to block Taiwan's entry. So I think we really need a new policy, a U.S. policy focusing on supply chain resilience or supply chain restructuring, and involving the friendly countries. This policy is still lacking until up to this point. So it's very hard for any president of Taiwan to be successful in this so-called southbound policy. We have a lot of motivation of doing that, and Taiwan can also have some leverage. But that leverage, given the trade environment right now, it will be something, if we invest in Southeast Asia, it will just help those countries to deepen their connection with the production base in China.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, and I mean, any of you can jump in on this, but what is the answer? Because there's clearly no magic bullet with trade agreements. And we have a couple of questions from audience members about this. One is on the CPTPP angle, another's on the new southbound angle. But I mean, I share Aaron's pessimism. In fact, I would pull it even further. At this point, I can't even imagine the U.S. doing another major multilateral or plurilateral trade deal, period. Okay,
Yeah.
period. Because we essentially have two anti-trade parties now, not just one. So that being the case, the US isn't going to be there to ride to the rescue. So that's one problem. The second problem, as Tiender just said, is China. In fact, beyond just CPTPP, I'm having trouble thinking of a country with which Taiwan has an FTA-like agreement that doesn't also have one with China. So
that's been the
if
Chinese
that's,
policy.
and China's policy has actually changed. It's not just, do one with us and then maybe you can do one with Taiwan. It's do one with us and don't do one with us. So China's going to be an obstacle too. So then we're outside the realm of trade pacts and we're into things like, number one, standard setting. Number two, firm level partnerships. So for instance, when I think of Taiwan's economic profile in Southeast Asia, there are a lot of EPC contractors, engineering, procurement, construction contractors. So for example, you could do third-party partnerships where US firms that are also active in Taiwan are using Taiwanese EPC contractors for their Southeast Asian business. Does that produce any kind of sectoral broadening or leverage? Because, and then we're back to knowledge-intensive industries. Things like entrepreneurship linking startups and knowledge-intensive industry in Southeast Asia to peers in Taiwan and the United States. And there are some schemes to do that. There's something called it's like an APEC entrepreneurship card, Aaron. It's called like GPAS Asia. So it encourages more contact among capital and experts. Can we build on things like that? Because it seems to me we're going to struggle in the area of trade pacts because of American absenteeism and Chinese coercion as the two pillars. So just throw out a couple of ideas that are actually prescriptive that Mr. Lai and Ms. Harris or Mr. Trump could work on in the next administration, should they all be presidents.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is trade. But, it's in this type of environment, I mean, it's just basically, and then the second one is like, make everyone go back to school and learn about economics. And it's just like, it is a science. It does produce winners and losers, but it is also the government's job to help address the issues with the losers. But yeah, I mean, APEC is certainly one area where we can work through. There has been some successes. It is primarily a talk shop, but I think in the last 2 or 3 host countries, they've been able to try to move beyond just having roadmaps and agendas and actually try to move on what those agendas and roadmaps have actually had. And that includes on the climate agenda. So I think that there's a lot of work to move on in terms of the climate transition and working together on that. And there's a lot of agreement on that, whether it's financing the energy transition. And there's going to be a lot of energy needs, especially if we're going into AI, quantum, semiconductors. The amount of energy that uses is going to completely counteract and undermine all the efforts that we're going to make on the climate transition. We're already talking about restarting coal-fired plants to help Bitcoin mining. It's just kind of a mess. So, that's certainly one thing. APEC is also another way to kind of keep that apoliticalness, and I say that in the lightest of terms because there's always the element in the room of having China there and being pushed in a way of, do we have to choose? We can't. We have relationships with both. And, I think that APEC is at least one such forum, and I think it's being reinvigorated in a way that it does have some teeth. But I think that there's also ways to show some leadership in a way that can help at least spell some movement, even if it's not in trade in itself. And that's movement on digital trade. There's pieces in the USMCA. There's pieces in the CPTPP that has chapters on digital trade that can work to start building frameworks. Emerging technology is moving faster than we are coming up with the legislation for. And, I think that Taiwan and the US can be leaders in trying to at least build the frameworks that can allow for better free flow of technology and trade, can help SMEs better do e-commerce. This will help the Taiwan economy. This will help the US economy. that when you have two democracies, let's hope the U.S. remains an economy or a democracy after November, that they're two of the democracies that I think would be best suited to do this. And you have partners that support that as well, including Japan. So I think that these are areas that Taiwan and Japan can work at. Taiwan can work on, and Japan.
So even if we're not in CPTPP, we take the annex. I mean, there's annexes on pharma, for example. Jason mentioned.
Right, there's pieces.
You take the annexes and you can do them as a bilateral or as a plurilateral.
Exactly. All the pieces are there. It's having the leadership to put it together. You know, I think another thing that I would like to add, and, you know, Jason alluded to it as well, is healthcare. If there's something that COVID brought out was that cooperation on healthcare is necessary. I was working at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, worked on the Quad initiative on COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing. And that was one effort to show how partners, private sector, can work together along a project lifeline and project life cycle in being able to provide for on a major issue, and then provided something that even went beyond COVID vaccine manufacturing. It was a manufacturing line that could be used for other vaccines as well. That was the only way that the DFC was going to invest in something like that. So it requires technology, it requires lab know-how, it requires manufacturing and best infrastructure building. So these are the types of things that I think that Taiwan and the US can also work with.
Yeah, it also requires regulatory openness. We actually wrote a report on life sciences and U.S.-Taiwan opportunities at Carnegie a couple of years ago. You can find it on the website. So one issue that the pharma companies has to do with the regulatory structure.
May I come in on one final quick
and
point?
Jason, I'm watching the clock, so we're going to start to. So maybe I'm going to go to you, and then Tiandra, you'll bring us home. But comment on that, Jason. But then also pull the thread on kind of like your top three things for the first. Let's say we get to 2025 with a new president here. Whether it's Harris or Trump, give me your top three things for what the agenda should look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think number one is the government support on the firm-to-firm collaborations. I think we need to ensure that TSMC project is successful in Arizona. I think it's been delayed, and so that sends signal to the outside that the U.S.-Taiwan collaboration is not going well, and we need to fix that. So that's not number one. And secondly, perhaps given that the multilateral trade agreement or the bilateral trade agreement are still kind of installed, I think that one way is to do this is government should help and can help, but do it quietly. And I think these issues of dealing with China in public and having to calculate China's reaction, I think it gives firm a lot of uncertainty when they need to deal with it, a huge amount of cost and that they come to bear when it comes to shifting their contract manufacturing or other assets. And thirdly, I think Taiwanese government should recognize now it's time to leverage Taiwan's strength. And I think certainly TSMC's experience in the U.S. has not been completely smooth. And I feel like government should be more assertive in negotiating on behalf of our firms to have a stronger policy support. And U.S. should recognize that it takes two to tango. You know, they can only be a strong partner when the other side is also strong. But then this type of unequal positioning, I think it's not good for either side. So I think that's very important to recognize. Taiwan is a partner to U.S. It's not someone that U.S. use and then abandon. And so that's a very important message even to send to domestic Taiwan audience as well. So I'll just stop here. But
I'm going to have you conclude. But Jason, just one second. Since Aaron mentioned crypto, can you do 30 seconds on whether digital assets is an area for potential U.S.-Taiwan collaboration?
Yeah, I think on the issue of a stable coin, I think that's a really interesting area that U.S. and Taiwan should seek collaboration, because we are an export-driven economy. Most of our firms deal with the currency exchange uncertainties and also a sort of a fluctuation. So if we could work with the U.S. on this stable coin type of policy collaboration, and U.S. and Taiwan can work strongly in the digital trade and to incorporate this element, I think it would be a really strong element to pursue, and in terms of dealing with a new type of digital assets, which I think Taiwan can attract a lot of talent and attention. Yeah.
Okay, Tender, I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah,
pull whatever threads you like, and also sort of tell me what you think 2025 should look like on the bilateral.
Right. I really agree with Aaron's suggestion. APEC may be a good sort of forum for U.S. and Taiwan to explore the possibility of cooperation on a regional basis, even with the participation of China. I think there's a much room to be explored. One of the very good example being the ITA, Information Technology Agreement, which is really coming out of APEC in 1985 and eventually adopted by WTO. So that's a good example. But at this point, I would just say one thing. For Taiwan to kind of create a new regime for trade, the trading condition is not too bad at this point. But however, that we are too much concentrated on semiconductor and ICT, information technology, and including semiconductor. I think that account for more than 60% of Taiwanese export. So we need to also diversify trade in terms of the export items. And in order to do that, Southeast Asia and India and probably Mexico increasingly are important, sort of the third party would need to be engaged. So this is a regional concept. It's a regional concept we need to adapt in order to further promote our trade relations with the United States, and also increase the value of export and diversify our export portfolio. So I really think that a new kind of approach for collaboration, instead of doing something on bilateral basis, we probably need to think about kind of multilateral or even tri-party kind of agreement. For example, Mexico is a very good example. We're increasing seeing more investment into Mexico, and they are serving U.S. market apparently. But Taiwanese companies and the government, they really have very little knowledge and connections to work with the Mexican government. So if we have the U.S. involved in this process, it would be much beneficial. And I think a lot of more creative arrangement could be found as a result of that. So of course that we have to make sure that Mexico is interested, and I'm pretty sure they will be interested in that, because it's increasingly an important export platform for U.S. companies, and the Taiwanese company are apparently engaged in this process. But there was no really good sort of forum for us to discuss the problems and to find out that the things can help improve the situation. So this is the area I think we could think about.
Yeah, thanks. So that's actually a great place to end, because it does answer very directly one of the very direct questions I put to you, which is what should the agenda look like for the Lai administration, but particularly for a new U.S. administration. And your answer, which builds on the answer others have said, is that we've always talked about it in bilateral terms, but maybe the answer is to sort through plurilaterals where the U.S. Taiwan plus or plus become the core of what economic, knowledge-intensive technology and investment strategy begin to look like. And that's a good charge for the next administration in the U.S., because whether it's Harris or Trump, sorting through that multiplicity of partnerships is going to be really central. And I think it's absolutely essential that Taiwan be fit into that concept, however it works out. So to be continued. And I'm grateful to all of you, and I'm grateful to the audience for joining us. And we thank you, and we'll keep doing this. We do periodic convenings like this on economic and technology issues between the U.S. and Taiwan. So thanks to all of you, and thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.